Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Blokes podcast. It's Ryan Hassan here. I'm joined by Nick Sutherland. Nick, how you been this last week? How's ISO life going for you?
ISO has turned into solitude.
Solitudo, what's that look like?
Uh, well, solitude is just a conscious disconnect. I think it's a mindful exercise in isolation, especially with Corona, has been enforced. But this is me choosing to disconnect. So I'm off social media. God, it's so good. I don't think I'm getting back on social media,
Yeah,
to be
it's
honest.
it's weird. I had start of this end of last year, start of this year. I had about 3 weeks of none, and it was fantastic. And then I did the classic, like turned it all back on. I'm like, what did I miss? And realized I missed fucking absolutely nothing. And then,
Mm.
yeah, I am using it a lot less then, but it still has this weird little pull. Because I remember saying the exact same thing as you at the time. I'm like, I'm not going to fucking go back. Fuck this. But now, you come up with like, I've got to use it for my business or this kind of thing. So it does
No,
tend to draw you
for me
back in.
it's just boredom. Like when I did the 10-day Vipassana meditation, I loved not being anywhere near my phone. They handed my phone back to me at the end, and I was just like, ugh, no thanks. And it took probably 3 or 4 days before you fall back into social media. But it was mainly just a boredom thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, where this time I've got a little, not PA, but a little helper person. So I'm just going to outsource all of the social media stuff to her,
What is she, a little pixie or
and
something? Just like about a few inches
yeah,
tall?
yeah, a little elf on the shelf. No, so I've gone into this isolation, disconnected from social media, um, and I've had to do that because I was in a bit of a mess. So
Do you have
I
a
do
fortress
this.
of solitude like Superman?
No, that's the honest answer. No.
So let's see. So you've maybe set a few little boundaries at the minute with your own energy.
Well, usually, you and I do this. We go into solitude. We'll go away for a week or a couple of days or whatever. I went to New Zealand by myself for 10 days and just drove around just in the Winnebago playing golf. I went to Bhutan and Cambodia by myself. I've done a Vipassana retreat. I go camping down in Gippsland. So usually I do this sort of stuff. But I realised I've been doing it probably more reactively when I've had to do it instead of doing it proactively like
Mm.
you more do. So the big realization has been that yeah, I'm an empath and I completely forgot.
How do you forget that? It seems to be quite a thing that's right there all the time. How do you forget?
Because you grow up being conditioned that it's a bad thing
Hmm.
and to stop being sensitive. So when you are sensitive, you sort of go into a sense of shame and a bit of embarrassment, and you try and suppress it and push it down and push it away and be something that you're not. That's the only thing I can partially relate it to is being gay and what it would be
Mm.
like to be gay. So suppressing your sexuality because it's not the norm and people don't like it, and then finally and having gay tendencies perhaps, and people going, "Oh, stop being so gay, would you?"
Mm.
And not realizing that you may be gay, and I am an empath, and telling me to stop being sensitive is telling me to stop being me and who I am.
Suppress part of your nature.
Totally,
Yeah. For
totally,
people for
and not
people who
only
don't.
suppressed it,
Yeah. Go.
but then became ashamed of it.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, this is, yeah. I suppose if someone is homosexual, that is part of their nature as well. It's a very good analogy. For people who don't know, like, what is being an empath? What does that mean?
We're just we I've learnt we have more mirror neurons, so our brains are literally different to other people's. When we're having a conversation, we've got all these little micro movements in our face, for example, I can pick up on so many more of them than somebody that doesn't have those neurons.
Mm-hmm.
The way I have spoken about it in the past without realising it is you go down to the beach and there's a rock pool. I can see every grain of sand in the bottom of the rock pool, where most people can just see rocks or
bunches,
a crab or a fish or something. Yeah. And it's not something you ask for. So that constant flood of information is, you can drown in it. But it's not only that, you pick up on people's energy as well. You feel what other people are feeling. Classic thing is all these videos get sent around of people being hurt. They're doing stupid shit at home and they'll fall over and hurt themselves. I can't watch that, because I fear what that person is experiencing in that time. I wish I could. I wish I could just laugh at it like everyone else and oh, what a dickhead. But it's not possible for me to do so.
Because you have a visceral experience of it. It's
exactly.
Yeah. I encourage people to check this out if they think they might be that way inclined. We chatted before.
The biggest giveaway is if you can't watch anything violent, if you can't watch the news or listen to the news, or you can't watch people being hurt, or you cringe, it's definitely worth checking out to see if you're an empath or not.
Absolutely. And this sort of links in with, I don't know if I've spoken about this on the podcast before, but the highly sensitive person, which we spoke before we turned the mics on, aren't the same, but I'm sure there's a lot of overlap between those two categories. Highly sensitive people, around 15 to 20% of the population. Why that is, the lady who does them has done the most research on this, Dr. Elaine, I can't remember her last name. But she's done the most research on this stuff, and it's sort of her summation that the reason why there's that percentage of the population, because they've found that there's that percentage of the animals they've studied as well have this highly sensitive trait too, and they think it's around maybe a survival of the species thing, is that if people have a certain percentage of a population has a more highly attuned nervous system, which is what a highly sensitive person is, which is just you feel everything more, then that allows for propagation of the species, because those ones are, say if there's a tribe, there's 20% or 15% who hear the noises of something out there, or they're more attuned to something that's about to go wrong, and or can tune into what other people in the tribe are going through, which they need to actually bring out. So it's an interesting theory, but at the end of the day, there is that percentage. For me, with the highly sensitive person, there's like a questionnaire you can do, and I'm just way down that high end, which is kind of good to know. As a guy, it can be very weird because we're not seen as sensitive, and it's seen as more of a feminine trait. But we all have that feminine and masculine energy. It doesn't matter what our gender is. But it's good to know that, because, like you said, it can get suppressed when we're younger because it's seen as different.
Well, I'm 42, and I'm only just coming out as being an empath, and I've spent the last 4 or 5 days embracing and accepting it and owning it and being at peace with it and being okay with it, and just trying to understand that I have to live a certain way, I have to do certain things in order to be okay, because I can't allow me to get into the headspace that I was in last Sunday.
It's like, if you have to sit down every night and watch someone getting hurt on the TV or something, and you had to do that, you'd like, I have to change my circumstances because I can't. We watched this show the other night. We were watching the David Attenborough stuff and all that on Netflix. He's got all the different series. And we're on the kids one for Tommy, so watching something, and I'm like, oh, there's a Attenborough one on here. It was like behind the scenes, so it was showing like a lot of the actual film crews and what they have to do to get a lot of this footage. And there was this one right at the end of the episode, and I was freaking out. I'm like, how can this be on the kids one? They were trying to film these walruses. There's like hundreds and hundreds of walruses. And apparently, normally they would go up on these ice cliffs and be okay, but the ice had melted. His whole thing's about climate change. So now they're trying to climb up these rocks out of the ocean, and they're so awkward. Walruses are massive and fucking awkward. But they climbed up this 80-meter cliff face to the top, and the whole time I'm like, how the fuck are they going to get down? And anyway, that was what the whole thing was about. They couldn't. So these film people were filming it, and the walruses didn't have the dexterity to get down a cliff, so they would just falling to their death. Hundreds and hundreds of walruses, and it's showing them all just falling down this cliff to their death. I was sitting there, I was like, I was traumatized. I'm like, why is this on the kids one? Why are they showing this? And I've been thinking about it for days ever since. And and I've spoken to a mate who watched that with his kid, and he's like, yeah, how funny with all those walruses falling to their death. I'm like, that wasn't funny at all. It was the worst thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, but you said the word trauma in that, and that's what we're experiencing. But the thing with empaths is that it's such a blessing, but such a curse. Like, we get to experience, like, if the spectrum's, -10 to +10 for most of the population, we're probably -20 to +20. So I get to experience joy and love and all the amazing things to so many degrees further than regular Joe. But conversely, I experience, and I'm very open with my history of mental health issues, and it's so common for empaths to experience mental health issues, mental illnesses, severe anxiety and depression, but also physical illnesses. Fibromyalgia is huge amongst empaths as well. So
it's there's the two sides to it. You can't have one without the other,
No, you can't.
And there is this high correlation between the mental illness and addiction and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. So not living an empathic life, I haven't been helping myself. I've always meeting other people's needs and not taking the time to self-manage and look after my energy, which has got me into some shitty spaces. So moving forward, especially in relationships, like, it's you can't hide from it. We're walking lie detectors. Nothing gets past us, which is really sad in a relationship, because people need to not feel so exposed all the time, I guess. But I read this thing where it said, if there was a village of 10,000 people, 200 of them would be empaths, and probably 10 of that 200 would be men.
Right, okay.
So in a village of 10,000, there's only going to be about 10 of us that are blokes.
Okay, do you think that's just something that happens naturally, or do you think that a lot of men are this way inclined but would never know it or never be able to acknowledge it?
I think it's a bit of both. I think women being the primary caregivers are more in touch with their emotions. They're more emotive. They're more emotionally driven creatures. They're
more nurturing.
More nurturing, more caring, more empathetic. You can still be empathetic without being an empath as well. You can put yourself in someone's shoes, but you can't feel what they're feeling like empaths do. But and then there's the other side where blokes aren't really taught how to evolve that part of themselves, that caring and nurturing nature. Like, as a man who's highly expressive, I try and talk about my feelings, and I get run over a lot. And I think women need to do a much better job of, you hear it. I wish my husband was, more open with his feelings. But as soon as a bloke opens up with his feelings, the women will run them over, because women aren't used to it. So they're not consciously doing it. It's not a bad thing that women. I'm not having a crack at women, but I think when a man does open up, whatever he's feeling, whatever he's saying, needs to be validated and needs to be recognised and understood, instead of turning it back around to making about the woman's feelings.
Yeah, it can often be a real pattern interrupt that catches a lot of people off guard. And so all of a sudden, you can say for years, I wish you'd open up, and then finally he does, and it's like, well, I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to know you had all those demons.
Put the toothpaste back in the tube, would you? Stop it. I don't
Too late. That's like, are you a Seinfeld fan?
Yes.
Yeah, there's the episode where Jerry starts getting feelings because he has a girlfriend because he runs through girlfriends all the time, and she's
Starts
like, "Oh,
getting feelings.
yeah," because he's a funny character. It's like he doesn't care and blah blah blah, and he has this one girlfriend, and she goes, "Oh, you never get angry. I've never seen you get angry." And he's like, "Yeah," and then he tries to, and she laughs at him because it's like really disingenuous, and she goes, "That's not good for you. You know, you shouldn't suppress blah blah." And then he started getting angry, and it was like the cat came out of the bag. You know, then he was getting angry at everything because it started to feel good, and then later on something happened, and he started crying, and he's like, "What's this salty discharge coming out of my face?" Because now all the emotions were coming out. And he was trying to give George a hug and tell him he loved him, and George is getting freaked out. And it's very, very funny. From a therapist point of view, watching that episode, it was hilarious. And then at the end, he finally was like, "Come on, George, I want to talk." And George is like, "Stop this, Jerry." And then George is finally, who's the most disturbed character in the show. And then George goes, "All right, I'm going to tell you what's in my heart." And then it cuts to the end, and Jerry's put all his emotions back in. And George is like, "What happened?" He goes, "You scared me straight. You scared me straight. It's all gone back in." And he left George just all his emotions out on the table.
He's left hanging. Jerry's at one end of the spectrum, but I think Kramer's at the other end. Like, Kramer feels everything. He's so expressive in his, the physicality as well.
And there's no filter with what he says.
No, and then I think George is somewhere in the middle. You know, he's very emotive, but then he shuts himself away as well. So I think
he's the classic neurotic.
Yeah, they've done a great job with finding characters the whole length of the spectrum.
I think that was one of the big successes of the show, was having that. You could see yourself in every character at some point.
Totally.
So it's interesting. I think, the empath or highly sensitive person obviously links with mental illness and addiction, but also you find a lot of people start heading towards, I suppose, career paths that are more on the creative side. So that can be therapist or counselor, that can be a comedian, that can be an artist, that can be a singer-songwriter or a musician. It's because if someone has more of that highly attuned nervous system, like you said, like if you go to the beach, instead of seeing just a crab and a rock, you see every single detail of what's happening. That's why then a lot of people become some sort of an artist, because you can convey what the experience of life is like to the people who aren't in that category. That's why you'll find a lot of empaths or highly sensitive people are affected deeply by music. I know. Yeah. I can listen to.
I play the drums.
Exactly.
Remember that meditation I did with Tool?
Yep.
That Tool afternoon I had. Mm-hmm. That was. I was not in a good headspace. So that afternoon was me trying to clean out my energy, I suppose, and having a drum kit in the house again is so important for me, because I can just go and release creatively. I've been journaling like a fucking madman. It's I'm just writing. I've got this really good article here, 13 signs of an empath. So 1, you take on other people's emotions as your own. 2, sometimes you experience sudden overwhelming emotions when you're in public. 3, the vibe of a room matters to you a lot, and I've experienced this. I can walk into a party and you just go, "No, I can't stay here. I can't stay in this room." 4, you understand where people are coming from, and a lot of this work goes back to Dr. Judith Orloff. She's sort of the foremost. I don't want to use the word expert, but on
cool,
this
an
stuff.
expert?
She's written I hate the word expert. It's like
Do you?
drinking your own bathwater. Yeah, as soon as you say you're an expert, it's like.
But you're calling her an expert.
No, I'm saying she's probably the most prolific person in that field. She wrote a book called The Survival Handbook for Empaths. Okay. So, number 5, people turn to your advice. All through high school, I was like the counsellor for all my friends. Number 6, tragic or violent events on TV can completely incapacitate you. Number 7, you can't contain your love of pets, animals, or babies. I seriously can't. I just go to fucking pieces. Number 8, you might feel people's physical illnesses too, not just their emotions. So I talked before about how I was on an aeroplane with a person and they felt sick, and I felt fine due to turbulence. And then when we got off, I threw up, and they were okay. So I took on what they were feeling.
This brings up surrogating, which I want to talk about at the end of this list. Yep.
Okay. Number 9, you can become overwhelmed in intimate relationships because you just get engulfed and get swamped, especially if you feel very strongly for a person. As I said, like, if you're loved by an empath, it's going to be a completely different experience to being loved by someone else, because our feelings are so much more deeper and powerful. Number 10, you're a walking lie detector. Once again, not a great attribute to have in a relationship, because everyone does little white lies and needs to put up a little bit of a facade, and you can't around us. Number 11, you can't understand why any leader wouldn't put their teams first. Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, empath, and you can tell through the way that she managed all the crisis that's happened over there. Was it the earthquakes?
Yeah. Yep.
Or
in Christchurch.
The earthquakes and coronavirus and everything. Number 12, you have a calming effect on other people and the power to heal them. So, in my work, people just walk in and all of a sudden they're walking agitated, and then within a couple of minutes they're completely, the walls are down. And number 13, you cannot see someone in pain without wanting to help. And this has been an issue for me. That attribute is great in my work, but then outside of my work, I can still see everyone in emotional pain and suffering, and I've just got this desire to go and help and to heal and to end that suffering, but people aren't asking for it.
Yeah.
And people don't want it. And when you go up to people and say, leading a horse to water and trying to make it drink, it's like sticking someone's head in the water and saying, "You're thirsty," and they're like, "No, I'm not.
I'm fine."
Yeah, I can see you are dehydrated. No, I'm not. I'm good. So, yeah, it's really important to come into an understanding of if you are an empath, and if so, what you need to do, A, to manage yourself, but B, to coexist, I guess, with other people that may not be empathetic.
Yeah, and I think this is where that, times of solitude help, because you need just a bit of a break, because like you said, it's not something you can just switch off and all of a sudden you see all the pain and suffering going on, whether that's on an individual or collective level, and you just want that to end, and it's not going to end anytime soon.
The whole world's in suffering, and I can't do anything about it. So
yeah,
it's so hard. It's so hard when you can see a person, someone you love, suffering, and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, especially when you feel that suffering as well, and then you're like, you want it to end for them, but you also want it to end because you don't want to feel it as well.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of empaths, in relationships, will sleep in separate beds because they're too close to the other person. Sometimes they'll sleep in separate houses. They need to check out often. Hello, Polly. No, can you go outside, please? Thanks.
Guest appearance, little cameo from Polly.
There she is. So it's but if you're in the dark with it, like anything, if you're in the dark, then you can't do anything about it. So
yeah. You can't change what we're not aware of.
Yeah, first step to change is awareness, and then the second step to change is acceptance. So accepting that I'm an empath and that it's actually okay to be sensitive, contrary to what I've heard from a lot of people.
That's right. So then you have to start to work on that old programming, because you say, okay, it's okay to be sensitive, but then I've heard that it's not growing up my whole life, so I've got to start to rewire that. And so I'll just touch on surrogating, because it was real interesting what you said about the person on the plane feeling sick and whatnot. Then when you landed, you went and throw up and they felt fine. So that's what, we would call surrogating. So it's when we see someone in emotional, mental, physical pain, and then because we have this ability to feel what other people are feeling, we feel like if we take that on board, it can alleviate the stress that's on that other person. And in this case, it sounds like it did, because they felt fine after you threw up.
But then they laughed and said, "Oh, I can't believe you threw up and I didn't." And I didn't realise it at the time, but I took it really personally. And yeah, it was difficult for me to sit with it because I'm like, on some level, I knew that I'd not done them a favour, but I'd helped and healed or assisted them, and then they turned around and sort of threw it back at me like it was me being something wrong with me or something.
Yeah, because
So
they're just unaware, but it feels
exactly,
very personal though. It feels very personal
yeah,
because it's like, hey, I took this on. You'll know that if someone comes up to you and starts talking to you and they're in massive distress, they've got this big problem, and they just start offloading and venting, and then they go, oh, I feel better now, and walk off, and you're left really heavy. So it's just like you've taken on all that stuff and say, let me hold that, which isn't
my
yours to hold.
history of relationships. Empaths are classics for attracting wounded birds or wounded doves, or narcissists. So I had a history in my earlier days of wounded doves everywhere. They'd come in and they'd be low self-esteem, low self-worth, everything. I'd give and heal, and then they'd go, feeling heaps better. Thanks, Nick. See you later. And they'd break off the relationship, and I'd be like, but what about me? Like,
Yeah, I'm drowning.
And then I was depleted. I was completely empty. So, as an empath, it's so important to learn what our boundaries are, and we have to adhere to these boundaries. And no, that's not okay. No, I can't do that for you, even though I want to. No, I don't. It's not going to be good for me. And before I can help anyone else, I need to be okay.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a learning process, isn't it? Because you know the outcome, but it's like
Yeah.
those.
And my history of being codependent on alcohol was a classic case of an empath in suffering. Imagine an empath being in the army. not a good recipe. And got medically discharged with anxiety and depression. Yeah, it sort of all fits now.
Yeah. What do you talk about? That the hard path to happiness, mate. You take the hard path yourself.
Yeah, I know. And then I spent 8 years drinking to numb the pain and to try and numb everything, basically. So yeah, what you said before, addiction amongst empaths is massive as well. And if the person treating that person doesn't recognise or realise that they're an empath and factor that in to the therapy or the healing, then
it's lacking.
Yeah.
It's not seeing the whole picture.
Exactly.
It's like if you went in and you're going in for some physical issue to the doctor and they'll give you a medication. They're like, oh, do you have any coexisting medical conditions? And you're like, no, but literally you're on 4 different medications because you've got something else going on. It's a similar thing. It's like a real
totally
spiritual. I don't know. It's not a condition. I just suppose it's an aspect of our nature. But then that back to that surrogating piece, that often starts in early childhood when we're very young, and it's normally a caregiver or someone that we love. We see them in emotional.
Talk about your personal experience.
Yeah. Mine was hopefully Mum's not listening, but a lot of my healing journey has been around going back and processing a lot of emotions that I'd taken on from my mum. So whenever I saw her in some sort of distress or anxiety or whatever it was, when we were a little kid, we don't have as many options, right? And this will lead on. Dr. Gabor Mate talks about this as being the cause of ADD as well. Actually, it's not genetic.
We're also such sponges as well, though. We don't have any defences either.
Yeah, that's right. But it's like, so I'll link this back to the empath thing. But Gabor Mate talks about how ADD starts in most cases as a coping mechanism, not as some faulty circuitry in the brain that we're born with. Is that if I'm young and someone comes in and threatens me, or I feel threatened in some sort of situation, if I'm an adult, I've got options, right? If someone came in right now to you, Nick, and just said, challenged you or whatever it was, and you felt threatened, you can fight back. Like, you're a grown man, you have the ability to fight back. You can call
another fighter.
Yeah, I know. But you got options, right? You can break the mold once in a while, punch someone's lights out, and then you could call for help. You could the window could be open. You could scream and get your neighbour to come over, right? Or you could run. You could just dodge out of the way and you could run. Or you have options of dealing with this stressful situation.
Fight, flight.
Correct. If I am a young kid, I don't have those options. I can't get up and run away. I can't fight back. I'm only a kid. I can't call out for help because the person who I would call out to might be the one causing the stressful situation. So now I'm literally have no defense mechanisms against this stressful situation. So oftentimes, if people are presented, young kids in that situation, their go-to coping mechanism is to start dissociating. It's like if I start to dissociate, I'm not going to feel as much pain because I'm not going to be as present. So I just tune out. And then this becomes the go-to. So now I'm at school. Whenever I feel a bit of anxiety or a stressful situation, I just tune out. And I don't know that I'm doing it consciously, but I just keep doing it. And this is where a lot of kids get labelled with ADD and that kind of thing, when it's just a coping mechanism of how they deal with stress. So linking this back, do you have something to say about that, Nick?
I'm relating to it, and I have a story, but I'm going to wait until you've finished yours.
All right, beautiful. I can just see the cogs in your mind ticking over. It's beautiful to watch. And so what happens with this empath or this sensitive side is that when we're young and we see one of our caregivers, someone that we love in emotional distress, and we don't have the ability to comfort them or maybe make the situation less stressful for them by altering things in the environment because we're too little, then what we do know that we can do is we can feel what they're feeling. And if I take on their emotions and start to feel it myself, it will ease the burden on them. So I'm helping them in some respect. And then that becomes a real coping mechanism that we keep taking on and taking on and taking on emotions of the people that we love especially, but eventually bloody everyone. So it can go from our parents, and then it'll go to maybe siblings, and then it'll go to friends, and then when we grow up, it's girlfriends like you spoke about. So we just get into this real groove of taking on and taking on and taking on other people's emotions, because that's how we learnt was the best way to help. So for me, that was as soon as I saw someone, it started with my mum, but as soon as I would see someone in emotional distress, I wouldn't think about it. It would just bang, take it on. Right? And straight away I would start feeling and feeling and feeling, not because I wanted to, but I thought that was going to help them, because I felt like it did when I was younger.
It sounds very empathetic in nature, and it depends on what you read. I've read something that everyone has the capacity or potential to be an empath, but it's shut down. Like I've heard lots of conversations about we all have the capacity to see spirits or to be a bit psychic, but that's closed off as well when we're children. You hear so many stories of kids seeing ghosts, and then the parent will say, "No, you didn't. No, you didn't. No, you didn't," and they'll convince the kids that they're being stupid or wrong or dumb. Or
like an imaginary friend or something.
I had one, Captain Dick French. Yep. That was his name.
That's the best. But, what a great name.
I know, but interesting. So when I was growing up, my dad was very violent, prone to violent outbursts because undiagnosed manic depression, drugs, alcohol, self-medicating, so forth. So it was me, my mum, my sister, and my dad, and he was violent towards all of us. But when he was violent towards mum and my sister, I couldn't do anything about it, and so I took all that on. I absorbed all that on, and it wasn't until I was 30 when mum said, "Oh, by the way, that wasn't your fault." I had this massive ab reaction, this huge release of it was like all these internal scars were pulled apart and just flushed from the inside. Like that's how cathartic this crying was, and it took me days to recover.
I can only imagine, because you'd imagine that part of you would have been holding on to that blame from when you were 3 years old.
Yeah, and the guilt and but as I was saying before, what you were saying, it sounds like as children, I think we're all empaths. We're all absorbed, because that's how we learn, is through these mirror neurons that I was talking about earlier. So monkey see, monkey do, and we do just take everything on. So for me, that was really important to do, and a lot of people call it shadow work. You've probably heard of shadow work and inner child healing and that sort of stuff. And I think that's so important to learn about our darkness, our monsters in the cave, and to go and find them and to befriend them and to not let them be so scary or to not let them be so heightened, because really they're just parts of us that are disturbed and in distress. So going and doing some work with them is just going to benefit our overall well-being, I think.
Yeah, and that's what you'll always find this wounded inner child, because like you'd imagine that the feelings that you are holding on to of blame and guilt from taking on that your dad was violent and holding that as your fault, that manifests in mental illness, diagnosis, alcoholism. Like it manifests in so many.
I had this feeling that I was going to have children by the time I was in my mid-20s. I don't know where that notion came from. It was just a belief that I was going to have kids. I've ended up with no children, and I think a big part of that was because of my childhood. I was so afraid of turning into my father. I was so afraid of, especially being an empath, the very thought of hurting someone else would have been causing such distress on a subconscious level that I would have done everything I could to not have kids.
To not recreate that pattern. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
To not put myself in a position where I could potentially continue that pattern.
Yeah.
I didn't trust myself.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. And so it's like sort of saying, Pete, you would see that as a shadow. So this side of you that's manifesting as destructive behavior, this is a shadow, and if I want to delve into that, I'm going to have to fight against it, or I'm going to have to try and evolve it, or whatever it is. But it's not that way at all. You just find that underneath the shadow was this child who took on all this blame that he didn't need to and was holding on to it for decades. And then it's a process of loving that child, and all it took was words from your mum saying it's not your fault for finally that child to just let go. And no wonder you took days to recover.
And the Linkin Park song, ironically.
Which one?
I can never remember the name of it, but Mum said, just listen to the lyrics of this song and talk about the healing nature of music. I don't think this would work for everyone. It worked for me because of how I'm constructed and my nature, I guess. But I don't know. I just listened to these words and everything peeled away. It just opened me so completely.
Yeah. That's so funny. When I was go.
No, I was just going to say, and the version of me that went through high school as well. Talk about ADD or ADHD. I didn't have that, but I was always so emotionally needy. I was stealing stuff and giving it to people so they'd love me and they'd be friends with me and everything, because I was so I had no self-worth, no self-esteem, no self-value, no self-love, no self-respect. All my self parts were completely debilitated and depleted. And as I spoke before about empaths have a lack of who am I, because we always take on so much as well. So it's a really interesting space to get into when you sit back and park and look at it all objectively and start joining all the dots, and you're like, oh, that's there and that's there.
Yeah.
That's what's going on there.
And sometimes you can realise how futile it was, because I had the image then of something similar when I was younger. So you can imagine there's a classroom of kids, and there's 25, 30 kids, and then it's like you don't know at the time because you don't have the awareness. You don't know, I'm an empath, or I'm a sensitive person, and this is blah, blah, blah. You have no fucking idea. Like, I had anxiety from the time I was 10, but I would never have, there's no concept in my mind, right?
Yeah,
it's just there's something wrong, right? But you can imagine your 25 to 30 kids, a group of people, like probably half or more, are going to be in some sort of distress or suffering, all right? And then you feel that, so then you kind of want to make sure the whole room's okay. So then you're trying to fight this battle where you're trying to make sure the whole room's okay, and you make this person's okay, but now someone's going into suffering over here, and it's just constant. And you can never, because you're never going to get a room of 30 kids where everyone's happy and fine. It's impossible. But you're trying to make it that way, which is just
I used to try by making everyone laugh. I'd be the class clown.
Yeah.
That was my
role. That's it. That's the way to do it on a group level.
But that had two kill two birds with one stone. A, I alleviated everyone else's pain, but B, people liked me because I'd throw myself under the bus. Or
Look how efficient you were being, mate.
I really respect that version of me.
Yeah, I love it.
That kid had some skills.
Skills. And
that version of me that had the Captain Dick French, my imaginary friend, he was around because I was so lonely and so misunderstood, and I continue to experience that as an adult, this feeling of being misunderstood. But having him in my life just created this amazing sense of comfort and peace, and like someone gets me, someone accepts me unconditionally, someone's not telling me to stop being so sensitive.
Yep.
You know, and that's what it goes. And I still remember the day he left, and he said, "All right, you're going to be okay. You don't need me anymore." And off we went. And we used to sail the world. Like, this is my imagination. We used to go on these amazing adventures. Looking back now, I was escaping reality. I was escaping the reality I was in. I couldn't drink. I couldn't do drugs. I couldn't do anything. So it's probably my coping mechanism. But the day he left, I was so sad. But I was also filled with this sense of peace as well, because I realised that was me telling myself that I was going to be okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realise that till decades later. But
that's almost like a bit of a parts integration you were doing on yourself.
No wonder I do what I do for a living.
Yeah, I know. What a pisser. It was funny you brought up saying Linkin Park, because Linkin Park was I was never a big Linkin Park fan growing up, but then they became, it was a bit of my anthem when I was beating the drug addiction, and they did this live set at Milton Keynes, which my old housemate used to have. It was really amazing. But there was a few songs on there, but like Breaking the Habit live, obviously Breaking the Habit, I was coming off drugs, was kind of an anthem, and I would play that every day and like scream and start crying and everything, and like using a very, very forceful masculine energy, but like, I'm fucking doing this, and it used to really get me fired up.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what song it was for me that pulled me apart, but I can't remember the exact lyrics. I don't know even why my mum was listening to Linkin Park either. Just now that I think about it.
Can't imagine her screaming to a few of those songs.
I can. She's a weird unit. She's palliative care nurse. She's empath. She's angels and spirits and all that. She very much walks to the beat of her own drum, and that's what I need to do more. I need to, in this sense of owning my nature, I really do have to own it whole and entirely, and if anyone's got a problem with it, that's on them. If they can't deal with if they can't see the positives that always come with some of the negatives, it's an interesting times ahead.
It is, and I think that's, we hear all the time, people like, oh, what's the best advice you got? Just be true to yourself, and everyone's like, what the fuck does that mean? Be true to yourself. You have to first understand who yourself is. So I think we all have our nature, and it's made up predominantly of a lot of, patterns, traumas, beliefs, blah blah blah. But we do have these part of your true nature. And I think you've uncovered you've always known, but you've just remembered that this is part of your true nature. So now the path is being true to that part, despite if it's going to mean making some hard decisions, or setting some boundaries.
Carl Jung was the first one that came up with the concept of a shadow self. And so when we say accept the self, we can't just accept the light bits. We have to accept the dark bits as well.
Yeah.
And so the self is like a yin and yang, and if we only like ourselves when we're in the light part, that's not going to work. So we have to accept that we have flaws, we're imperfect, we've got immaturities, we've got unhealthy patterns from conditioning as children, we've got unhealed traumas. It's the whole kit and caboodle has got to be accepted.
And we all have fucked up thoughts, People beat themselves up for an automatic thought pattern that comes up. Like, if I'm down the beach and like some kids have made this beautiful sandcastle and a voice goes, "Oh, go and kick that fucking thing over." Now I don't do it, but like the voice comes up, or like you're walking on the edge of a cliff and then a voice goes, "Oh, what if you jump?" Now, you don't do it, but you just have these thoughts, People, I'm just using examples that I have, but we all have different fucked up thoughts at the end of the day. We all have a shadow self, and we can't. But by just liking the light, that's that. We're just getting attached to one side. It's like people who say, "I only want to feel love, joy, and happiness." It's like, well, you're in for a fucking tough ride if that's all you want to feel.
Do we need to do some shadow work with you, Ryan? You're going to kick over little kids' sandcastles?
I love my shadow. It's a beast. It's an absolute beast. It's a
Too
big
much
shadow.
wrestling as a kid.
Yeah, too much. Something else I wanted to bring up, actually. We I don't know how long. You touched on something, and I just remembered with creative endeavors, like you having the drums at home or that kind of thing, or listening to music. And I've been having chats with a few men lately who clearly have this strong sensitive and creative side that has been squashed throughout their life. We all have a analytical, critical thinking self,
left and right brain.
Classic left and right brain, and the creative self. And we can have different degrees, but we've all got it. And I've speaking to a lot of men who have neglected that creative side for so long that it's screaming out for expression. But the problem is that analytical side's gotten so strong that as soon as they're like, I've got time to play that guitar, or I've got time to do that writing I wanted to do, the analytical mind's like, no, you have to do A, B, and C, you have to do this, blah, blah, and it'll talk them out of it. No, but if you go and take those photos, do the photography, then you're going to have to store them on this backup drive, and, you probably have to clear the backup drive. This is a literal conversation I had this week, right? And I'm like, are you hearing the excuses that analytical mind's coming up with? They're fucking ridiculous, but we listen to it, right? Because it makes sense. Yeah, but meanwhile, we do that over years, and that creative part of us, it's like a little version, like we're a babushka doll. There's a little creative one inside of us, and it just wants to burst out. And we've been putting it back in its box for years, and then all of a sudden we create an imbalance. So there's an imbalance internally because it's not getting expressed, and then that leads to agitation, frustration, getting a little bit more angry and all this. And all it is just let that creative side out and make time for it, and don't listen to the analytical mind when it says you shouldn't do it for A, B, and C. Just say, fuck it, I'm doing it. Because without fail, every time we let that creative side out, we feel better. And we say, every single time we say, oh, I should have done that last week, should have done it last month.
Well, if you don't create the outlet and do the creative stuff, that's where you're going to go to coping mechanisms. That's where you're going to go and drink or take drugs or spend money or get into Facebook or whatever. So it's don't put baby in the corner, man. Let those creative juices flow.
Yeah, in whatever form that takes for you, and there'll be a form, just whatever you did when you were younger.
I watch heaps of. I take heaps of photos. I'm very. I love. I write. I take photos. I play the drums. I need that creative outlet. If I can't do that, I get all bent out of shape.
You get a bit funny.
I get a bit funky. We're going to touch on Bronnie Ware's work.
That has to be next week, Nick.
Yeah, so we're going to finish up and we'll come up with a segue for it, because I think they're linked in. There's these 5 top regrets from the people who are dying that they wish they'd done, and I think a lot of it fits into what we've spoken about today. So
yeah, I think this is a good lead in.
Part 1 and 2.
Yeah. We just to let everyone know, we initially, before we jumped on, the whole episode was meant to be about the 5 regrets of the dying and start to talk about those, and then I said to Nick, I'm like, we'll just touch on that empath thing. That sounds like we might be able to talk about that for a minute. And we've talked about the whole fucking episode.
So people are going to have to wait with bated breath for the next episode.
I didn't talk about bated breath. Let's finish up with bated breath, all right? So this is a silly saying of the week. Because Nick messaged me last night and you said, I want to talk to you about something tomorrow. I'm like, I'm waiting with bated breath. So... Nick, where does this come from? This is a real weird one.
I don't know, man. My first thoughts go into fishing bait. Like
Me
this
too.
Is the connection I'm doing. I'm like just picturing Ryan with sardine in his mouth. I've got breath, and then I don't want to have a conversation with you because it's going to stink.
No, I think that I've got bated breath, so I've got this fishy mouth, and for whatever reason, I can't clean my fishy mouth until I've had the discussion with you. So it's like because if I say I'm waiting with bated breath, I can't. I'm saying I can't wait to hear what you have to say. That's what I'm trying to in a roundabout way. Is that right?
Well, when you bait the hook, and then you have to wait for the fish to come along. So the bait attracts the fish. There's a waiting period. So by me saying I've got this thing to talk about, it's like I'm baiting you, and you have to wait until tomorrow, and you're going to be the fish that comes along. So you've got this. I don't know where the breath comes into it. You weirdo.
I think that.
Okay,
there you go.
Let's do what we usually do. Let's go back to the first person that ever would have said this. In a fishing village in Greece.
It was a fishing village in Greece, and what was his name? Franco, right? Franco, he went fishing, and he didn't catch any fish for the day, and they were very poor, this family, right? Very, very poor. So it ended up, he had to cook his family the bait.
Yeah.
Right? So they've had to just fry off some shitty whiting. It was terrible. It was a really low moment for him in his life, not being able to provide for his family like he normally does. But the fish, it just been a low season. And so he'd eaten the dinner, and then his friend calls by, and he says, Franco. So this is Miguel. Miguel comes past and says, Franco. Miguel's not very Greek, is it?
Very Greek names.
No, I'm not good with my Greek names. Antonio came past.
George.
And so he said, Franco, I know it's been a lean fishing season. You're having trouble with the family. But, mate, tomorrow I'm going to show you I found a spot that no one else knows. And there's fish. They'll jump out of the water into your fucking boat. It's so plentiful. It's amazing. And he just had his dinner and he said, I wait with bated breath.
I can't add to that. I cannot. You've drawn him in. I'm picturing him. He's like picking these little scales out of his teeth from the little sardines that he's had to feed him and his family. He's like, I'm waiting.
He's looking back at his family are all depressed.
Yeah.
I'm looking this up. I know we don't normally look it up, but it's really. I think baited.
No, don't. You've done it. You've done it.
Have I?
Yes, that's it. That's perfect.
All right.
You've done it.
Nick, let's wrap it up there, and I wait for next week's episode with bated breath, where we talk about the 5 regrets of the dying and how we can avoid those. Bronnie Ware, palliative care nurse, watched thousands and thousands of people die. She saw there was top 5 that kept reoccurring, that people on their deathbed, the regrets they had about living their life, and she wrote a book about it years ago. There's been a lot written about it, but I think it would be important to talk about how we can avoid having those regrets when our time comes.
Perfect. Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Any questions, hit us up on Instagram, Woke Blokes Podcast, Mind Fit, or the Centre for Healing, and let us know what you'd like us to talk about, and we will talk about it.
I won't, because I'm off social media, but Ryan can deal with it.
I'll deal with it. I'm the social media queen.
Great.
All right, peace out, everyone.
Peace.
Bye.